It hurt. Down there too, the virgin giant mail order bride cried. The rancher pulled it back. And froze. It hurt. Down there too, Magnolia Thornhill sobbed into the darkness, her virgin body trembling beneath her new husband on their wedding night, and when Cord, Brennan felt the excessive warmth spreading between them and saw her face contorted in agony that went beyond normal first-time discomfort. He pulled back and froze. The lamplight flickered across her tear-streaked face, and Cord's hands were shaking as he reached for the cloth on the nightstand. His heart was hammering so hard he could hear it in his ears. This wasn't right. This wasn't normal. In 3 years of marriage to Sarah, he'd learned a woman's body well enough to know that first times could be uncomfortable, awkward even, but not like this. Not with this much blood soaking into the sheets beneath them. Not with Maggie's face gone pale as milk, her lips trembling, her whole body rigid with pain that seemed to radiate from deep inside her. "I'm sorry," she whispered, and those 2 words broke something in his chest. "I'm sorry, Cord, I can bear it. Please just finish. I know this is how it's supposed to be." "Stop!" His voice came out rougher than he intended. He pressed the cloth gently against her, and she flinched, biting back a cry. "Maggie, where exactly does it hurt?" Her honey-brown eyes were swimming with humiliation. "Everywhere. Down there, yes, but my hips feel like they're being torn apart. My back is aching so deep I can barely breathe. But the doctor in Kansas said I was built different because of my height, that everything would just be harder for me, that I'd have to endure more than other women." Cord sat back on his heels, his mind racing. He'd met that giant of a woman just 12 hours ago when she stepped off the train in Copper Ridge, towering over every man on that platform at 6 feet and 1 inch tall. He'd seen the shame in her eyes when old Silas made that thoughtless comment about her being a tall drink of water. He'd watched her try to make herself smaller at their wedding supper, hunching her shoulders like she'd been doing it her whole life. And now here she was on their wedding night, apologizing for being in agony. Believing her pain was normal, was deserved, was just the price of being different. But Cord Brennan had buried a wife 3 years ago. He'd held Sarah's hand while she screamed through labor that went on for 2 days before the baby came too early and too still, and she bled out in his arms an hour later. He knew what women's pain looked like. He knew what normal looked like. And this wasn't it. "Get dressed," he said quietly, already reaching for his trousers. Maggie's eyes went wide with confusion and fresh shame. "What, Cord? I can try again. I promise I can. We're going to town. Right now. But it's past midnight. I don't care if it's 3 in the morning." He pulled his shirt over his head, then gently helped her sit up, wincing at the way she gasped and pressed a hand to her lower abdomen. "Maggie, listen to me. Something is wrong. I don't know what, but this isn't normal pain. This isn't just being built different. We're going to see Doc Harrison." "No." Her voice cracked. "Please, Cord, I'm already humiliated enough. I don't want the whole town knowing that on my wedding night, my own husband had to take me to the doctor because I'm too broken to even—" "You're not broken." He cupped her face in his calloused hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Do you hear me, Magnolia? You are not broken, but something is hurting you. And I'll be damned if I let you suffer through it just because some quack doctor told you it was normal." She stared at him, and he saw something flicker in her expression, something that looked almost like hope, buried under years of being told she was wrong, was too much, was freakish. "What if he can't help? What if this is just how I am? Then we'll figure it out together." He pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. "But we have to know the truth first. Can you stand?" The ride to Copper Ridge was the longest 2 hours of Cord's life. Every rut in the road made Maggie whimper, despite her efforts to stay quiet. He pushed the horses harder than he should have, his jaw clenched so tight it ached. She sat beside him, wrapped in a quilt, her face turned away, and he knew she was crying silently. He wanted to say something comforting, something reassuring, but the words stuck in his throat. What if the doctor confirmed her worst fears? What if she really was just built so different that intimacy would always be torture? But what if she wasn't? What if all those years of shame and pain could have been prevented if just one doctor had actually listened to her? The lights of town appeared over the ridge, and Cord felt Maggie tense beside him. "Almost there," he murmured. "Hold on just a little longer." Doc Harrison's house sat at the edge of town, a tidy white building with a lamp still burning in the window. The old doctor was known for keeping late hours, thank God. Cord barely had the wagon stopped before he was jumping down and coming around to help Maggie. She moved so slowly, so carefully, like every shift of her body sent fresh waves of pain through her. He pounded on the door hard enough to rattle the frame. Footsteps approached, and then Doc Harrison opened the door with a shotgun in his hands and a scowl on his weathered face. The scowl disappeared the second he saw Cord's expression. "What happened?" "My wife needs help." Cord's voice was steady, but his hands were shaking as he supported Maggie up the steps. "Something's wrong. Something's been wrong for a long time, and nobody bothered to figure out what." Doc Harrison's sharp eyes swept over Maggie's pale face. The way she was hunched and trembling, the blood cord could now see staining her skirt despite the quilt. His expression hardened. "Martha," he called over his shoulder. "I need you." A woman's voice answered from deeper in the house, and then Martha Harrison appeared, already tying back her grey hair. She took one look at Maggie and immediately put a gentle arm around her. "Come with me, dear. Let's get you somewhere more comfortable." "I should stay with her," Cord started, but Doc Harrison shook his head. "You wait here. My wife will help her undress and prepare for examination. This is women's business right now." Cord wanted to argue, but Maggie glanced back at him and nodded slightly, giving him permission to let her go. He watched Martha lead her behind a curtain into the examination room, and then he was alone with Doc Harrison in the waiting area, his heart still pounding, his hands still shaking. "How long have you two been married?" Doc asked, his tone carefully neutral. 12 hours. "She's a mail-order bride. Tonight was our wedding night." Doc Harrison's eyebrows rose. "And you brought her here instead of just pushing through?" Cord's hands clenched into fists. "I'm not an animal. When a woman is in that much pain, you stop. You figure out why." He met the old doctor's eyes. "Something's wrong with her. Really wrong. She said her doctor back in Kansas told her everything was just different because she's tall, but I've never seen pain like that from what should be normal." Behind the curtain he could hear Martha's gentle voice asking questions and Maggie's quiet, shame-filled answers. Minutes stretched like hours. Cord paced the small room, his boots wearing a path in the floorboards. What was taking so long? Was it worse than he thought? Was she? The curtain moved, and Doc Harrison disappeared behind it. More murmured conversation, then silence that seemed to last forever. When Doc Harrison finally emerged, his expression was grim. "Mr. Brennan, you need to come in here. Your wife needs to hear this, and she needs you with her." Cord's blood ran cold, but he followed the doctor behind the curtain. Maggie was lying on the examination table, still covered by a sheet, Martha holding her hand. Her face was blotchy from crying, her eyes red-rimmed and exhausted. When she saw Cord, fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. Stop apologizing." Doc Harrison's voice was sharp enough to cut through her spiral. "Mrs. Brennan, what I'm about to tell you is going to be difficult to hear, but I need you to listen carefully." He pulled up a stool and sat down, his weathered hands folded in front of him. "You have a medical condition called endometriosis. Do you know what that means?" Maggie shook her head mutely. "It means tissue that should only grow inside your womb is growing in other places, on your ovaries, your fallopian tubes, even on the outside of other organs. Every month when you bleed, that tissue bleeds too, but it has nowhere to go. It causes inflammation, pain, and scarring. In your case, it's severe." He paused. "Combined with what I believe is a bicornuate uterus, a birth defect where your womb is shaped differently than most women's. You have a condition that makes intimacy extremely painful and pregnancy nearly impossible." The words hung in the air like stones. Cord watched Maggie's face crumple, watched her free hand press against her mouth to hold back a sob. "So I'm broken," she whispered. "I knew it." "I always knew." "No." Doc Harrison's voice was firm. "You have a medical condition that should have been diagnosed years ago. That hack in Kansas who told you everything was just different because of your height should be stripped of his license. This has nothing to do with your height and everything to do with medical ignorance hiding behind prejudice. But could he actually help her? Could anyone? Or was Maggie doomed to a life of pain and shame, always being too different, too damaged, too much? Cord sat on the edge of the examination table, his arm around Maggie's shaking shoulders, as Doc Harrison explained what came next. The words washed over him in waves: management strategies, pain relief options, modifications to intimacy. But all he could focus on was the way Maggie had gone completely still beside him, like she'd turned to stone. "So there's no cure," she said finally, her voice flat and lifeless. "I'll always be like this." "The condition is chronic," Doc Harrison admitted, "but it can be managed. Some women find significant relief with certain approaches. Plenty of time for arousal before attempting penetration. Positions that reduce pressure on the affected areas. Herbal tinctures for pain. It won't be easy, Mrs. Brennan, but it doesn't have to be torture either. And children?" The question came out barely above a whisper. The doctor's expression softened. "I won't give you false hope. The scarring and the shape of your uterus make conception and carrying to term extremely unlikely. But unlikely doesn't mean impossible. I've seen stranger things in 30 years of practice." Maggie nodded slowly, mechanically, like she was agreeing to something that didn't really matter anymore. Cord felt her pulling away from him emotionally, even though she hadn't moved physically. He recognized that look in her eyes. He'd seen it in his own mirror for 2 years after Sarah died. It was the look of someone who just had their last shred of hope ripped away. Martha Harrison pressed a small brown bottle into Maggie's hands. "Valerian root and wild lettuce. Take a spoonful before bed tonight. It'll help with the pain and let you sleep." Her voice was kind but matter-of-fact, the voice of a woman who'd seen suffering before and knew sympathy alone couldn't heal it. "Come see me in a few days. I'll teach you some other remedies that might help." The ride back to the ranch happened in silence. Dawn was breaking pink and gold over the Montana landscape, painting the grasslands in shades of honey and rose. It should have been beautiful. Cord had always loved this time of morning, when the world felt new and full of possibility. But now the sunrise just felt like mockery. All that light and beauty while beside him sat a woman who just learned her body was her enemy. He tried several times to say something, anything, but every sentence he formed in his head sounded wrong. What could he possibly say that wouldn't sound like empty platitudes? That it would be okay? It wouldn't. That he didn't mind. That made it sound like she needed his permission to exist. That he still wanted her? After what she'd just been through, the last thing she probably wanted was to feel desired. So he stayed quiet and drove the horses home, and Maggie stared out at the landscape with dead eyes, and the distance between them felt wider than the Montana sky. When they finally reached the ranch, Silas was already up and feeding the horses. The old ranch hand took one look at their faces and wisely kept his mouth shut, just nodded and went back to his work. Cord helped Maggie down from the wagon, and she moved like a woman 3 times her age, every step careful and painful. Inside the house, the bedroom felt like a crime scene. The blood-stained sheets were still tangled on the bed, the lamp still burning low, her white nightgown discarded on the floor. Maggie stood in the doorway and stared at it all, and Cord watched her face go even paler. "I'll change the sheets," he said quickly. "You should rest. Take some of that medicine Doc gave you." "I'm sorry," she interrupted, still staring at the bed. "I'm sorry you got stuck with a wife who can't even do the one thing wives are supposed to do. Maggie, you could probably get an annulment. On grounds of..." Her voice cracked. "Whatever the legal term is for a wife who's too broken to consummate the marriage." Cord felt something snap inside his chest. He crossed the room in 3 long strides and grabbed her by the shoulders, not rough but firm enough to make her look at him. "You listen to me, Magnolia Brennan. I didn't marry you for breeding stock. I didn't marry you to use your body and throw you away if it didn't work the way I wanted. I married you because your letter was honest and kind, because I thought maybe 2 lonely people could build something together. That hasn't changed. But I can't give you children. I buried a wife and son 3 years ago." His voice came out harsh, rougher than he intended, but he couldn't stop the words now. Watched Sarah scream for 2 days, while our baby died inside her. Held her while she bled out in my arms, because there was nothing anyone could do. You want to know the truth? The thought of going through that again terrifies me more than dying alone. So no, Maggie, I don't need you to give me children. I need you alive and whole, and not destroying yourself, trying to be something you can't be. She stared at him, her honey-brown eyes wide and swimming with tears. Then what do you need from me? I need you to give yourself time to heal. I need you to stop apologizing for having a medical condition that's not your fault. I need you to believe me when I say you're not broken. He loosened his grip on her shoulders, letting his hands slide down to hold hers. And I need you to trust me enough to tell me the truth about what you're feeling, instead of just trying to endure everything alone. I don't know how to do that, she whispered. I've spent my whole life just enduring. Then we'll figure it out together. He squeezed her hands gently. But first you need to rest, real rest. I'm going to change these sheets, and you're going to take that medicine, and you're going to sleep as long as your body needs. Okay? She nodded slowly, and he saw some of the tension leave her shoulders. It wasn't acceptance exactly, wasn't healing, but it was the first step toward not fighting him on every kindness he tried to offer. He stripped the bed, while she changed into a clean nightgown behind the privacy screen, moving slowly and carefully. When she emerged, she looked so young and lost that it made his throat tight. He'd put fresh sheets on the bed, opened the window to let in the cool morning air, and laid out the bottle of medicine with a glass of water on the nightstand. Thank you, she said softly, climbing into bed with visible relief. The medicine was already working, he could tell. Her eyelids were heavy, her movements sluggish. I'm going to sleep in the other room, he said, heading for the door. Give you some privacy and space. Cord. Her voice stopped him. Would you? Could you just stay? Not for... I just don't want to be alone right now. Something in his chest loosened and tightened at the same time. He nodded, kicked off his boots, and climbed onto the bed beside her, staying on top of the covers while she was under them. She rolled toward him immediately, pressing her face against his shoulder, and he wrapped an arm around her carefully, avoiding anywhere that might hurt. I'm scared, she whispered into his shirt. I know. Me too. Of what? He thought about lying, about being strong and stoic the way men were supposed to be. But she'd asked for truth, and truth was what he owed her. That I won't know how to help you. That I'll mess this up somehow. That you'll spend the rest of your life regretting getting on that train to Montana. She was quiet for a long moment, her breathing already slowing as the medicine pulled her toward sleep. I don't regret it, she finally murmured. You're the first person who ever stopped when I said it hurt. The words gutted him. How many people had hurt her and kept going? How many times had she said stop or please or it hurts and been ignored? How many years had she spent believing her pain didn't matter? He held her closer, feeling her body relax into sleep against him, and made a silent promise to himself and to her. She'd spent 23 years being told she was too much, too different, too broken. He was going to spend however long it took, showing her she was wrong. Outside the window, the ranch was coming to life. He could hear Silas calling to the horses, Rosa starting breakfast in the kitchen, the sound of cattle lowing in the distance. Normal morning sounds on a ranch that was barely scraping by, that needed every hand working from dawn to dusk if they were going to survive the coming winter. But that could wait. The cattle could wait. The fence repairs and the hay stores and the 100 other things that needed doing could all wait. Right now, the only thing that mattered was the woman sleeping fitfully in his arms, her face still creased with pain even in sleep. Her body finally getting the rest it desperately needed. Cord closed his eyes and listened to her breathe. And for the first time since Sarah died, he prayed. Not for miracles or easy answers, just for the wisdom to help her heal, the patience to let her set the pace, and the strength to be worthy of the trust she'd just placed in him. The morning sun climbed higher, filling the room with golden light. And Cord Brennan held his broken but not broken wife, and wondered how he was going to keep the promise he'd just made when he barely knew how to keep himself together. But he'd figure it out. They'd figure it out. Because that's what partners did. They carried each other when the weight got too heavy to bear alone. And Maggie had been carrying her burden alone for far too long. When she woke hours later, the afternoon sun slanting through the windows, she found him still there, still holding her, his own exhaustion finally catching up with him. She studied his sleeping face, the lines of grief carved around his mouth, the grey threading through his dark hair, the calluses on his hands that spoke of hard work and harder years. He'd stopped for her. He'd listened when she said it hurt. He'd taken her to get help instead of just taking what he wanted. Maybe, she thought drowsily, still half caught in the fog of medicine and pain. Maybe this could work. Maybe two broken people could make something whole together. Not by fixing each other, but by being honest about all the cracked and damaged places and choosing to stay anyway. It wasn't the fairy tale she'd imagined as a little girl. But then again, fairy tales never had giants in them. At least not the kind who got their happy endings. Maybe it was time to write a different story. One where the giant got to be the heroine instead of the monster. Where the scarred rancher got to love again without forgetting what he'd lost. Where two people who'd been told they were too much or too broken found out they were exactly right for each other. She closed her eyes and let herself drift back to sleep. And this time, she didn't dream of pain or shame or all the ways her body had failed her. She dreamed of wide Montana skies and a man whose hands knew when to stop and whose heart knew how to stay. 3 weeks passed like water finding its level, slow and steady and reshaping everything in its path. Cord moved his things to the small bedroom across the hall without being asked, giving Maggie space to heal both body and soul. He never pressured, never hinted, never made her feel like she owed him anything. Instead, they built something neither expected, a partnership that had nothing to do with the marriage bed and everything to do with survival. Maggie discovered she was good at ranching. Better than good. Her height and strength meant she could lift fence posts that would take 2 men, could wrestle a stubborn steer into submission with patience and firm hands, could work from sunup to sundown without flagging. Cord watched her gentle as spooked horse one afternoon, her voice low and soothing, her massive hands surprisingly delicate as they stroked the animal's neck. And something shifted in his chest. "You're a natural," he said when the horse finally calmed. She glanced at him, surprised. "I grew up on a farm. Animals don't care how tall you are." People should take lessons from animals then. The words hung between them, and he saw color rise in her cheeks. It wasn't the first compliment he'd paid her, but something about this one landed different. She smiled, small and uncertain, and went back to the horse. Evenings became their time. After supper, they'd sit in the parlor with the account books spread between them, and Cord discovered Maggie had a head for numbers that put his fumbling calculations to shame. She reorganized his entire ledger system in one night, found 3 billing errors he'd missed, and projected their winter expenses with frightening accuracy. "You should be my partner in this operation," he said one night, watching her work. "Not just my wife. My actual business partner." She looked up from the ledger, pencil frozen mid-calculation. "Is there a difference?" "There should be. I want your opinion on ranch decisions. I want your name on the property deed. I want—" He hesitated, then pushed forward. "I want you to know you have a place here that's yours by right, not just by marriage. If something happens to me, if you decide you can't stand me anymore, whatever, this ranch is as much yours as mine." Tears glittered in her eyes. "Why would you do that?" "Because you've earned it. Because it's right. Because—" He met her gaze across the lamplight. "Because I don't want you staying with me out of obligation or fear. I want you to stay because you choose to." That night she didn't go straight to her room. She lingered in the parlor doorway, her hand on the frame, her expression uncertain. "Cord, could we just sit together? For a while?" He made room on the settee, and she sat beside him, careful to keep a few inches between them. But after a moment, she leaned her head on his shoulder, and he felt the trembling breath she released. His arm came around her automatically, and they sat like that until the fire burned low, not talking, not doing anything except existing in the same space, without pain or pressure or expectation. It was the first time since their wedding night that she'd chosen to touch him, and Cord treated that trust like the precious thing it was. When she finally stood to go to bed, he caught her hand and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Good night, Maggie." "Good night, Cord." She paused at the stairs, looking back.
"Thank you."
"For being patient. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere." But patience was tested a week later when Duncan Flint cornered them outside the mercantile in town. The neighboring rancher was drunk and mean, his eyes raking over Maggie with undisguised contempt. "Heard you got yourself a freak show bride, Brennan." He sneered loud enough for half the street to hear. "What's the matter? Couldn't find a real woman to warm your bed? Had to special order a giant?" Cord's fist broke Flint's nose before Maggie could even process the insult. The rancher went down hard, blood streaming, and Cord stood over him with murder in his eyes. "That's my wife you're insulting," he said, voice deadly quiet. "My partner, and any man who has a problem with her can take it up with me." The gathered crowd went silent. Maggie stood frozen, her face burning with familiar shame, but also something else. Something warm and fierce that felt almost like pride. No one had ever defended her like that. No one had ever made someone bleed for disrespecting her. Cord turned to her, his knuckles already swelling. "You ready to go home?" She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. They walked to the wagon together, his hand on the small of her back, and the crowd parted for them like water. That night, Maggie came to his room. She stood in his doorway, wearing her nightgown, her honey-brown hair loose around her shoulders. And Cord sat up in bed so fast he nearly knocked over the lamp on his nightstand. "Maggie, what's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong." Her voice trembled but held steady. I just... After today, after what you did for me in town, I want to try again. Not because I have to. Because I want to." Cord's heart hammered against his ribs. "Are you sure? We don't have to rush, I'm sure." She stepped into the room, closing the door behind her. "But I need you to promise me something. If I say it hurts, you'll stop. Like you did before. Always," he said hoarsely. "Always, Maggie." What happened next was nothing like their wedding night. This time, Cord took hours. He kissed her until she stopped trembling, touched her until she gasped with something other than fear, learned every place that made her sigh and every angle that made her tense with pain. He listened when she said "not there," or "softer," or "wait." He adjusted when she needed him to, stopped when her breathing changed in the wrong way, praised her when she told him what she needed instead of just enduring. And when they finally came together, when her body accepted him with only the dull ache Doc Harrison had said might always be there, when she looked up at him with tears in her eyes and whispered, "It's okay, keep going," Cord felt something break open in his chest that had been locked tight since Sarah died. "Does it hurt?" he asked after, smoothing her hair back from her damp forehead. "Yes," she admitted. "But it was also good, really good." His answering smile was the first truly unguarded expression she'd seen from him. "We'll keep practicing then, for purely medical reasons." Her laugh was startled and bright and beautiful. Of course, the months that followed brought changes neither could have predicted. Maggie started helping Doc Harrison with difficult births and animal injuries, her steady hands and calm presence making her invaluable. Cord added her name to the property deed and started introducing her as his partner, not just his wife. They worked the ranch together, argued over cattle breeding schedules, made love on nights when her pain was manageable, and held each other on nights when it wasn't. When spring came and brought news of a distant cousin's orphaned daughter who needed a home, they didn't hesitate. 8-year-old Emma arrived in May, small and watchful, and desperately in need of parents who understood what it meant to be different. 1 year after Maggie stepped off that train, she stood on the porch of the Brennan Thornhill Ranch, watching Cord and Emma bring in the herd. The practice she'd built was thriving. The ranch was profitable. And the man who'd stopped when she said it hurt had taught her that love wasn't about being perfect or whole or fixed. It was about being seen and chosen anyway. That night, after Emma was asleep and the Montana stars blazed overhead, Cord pulled Maggie into his arms and kissed her like he'd done 1,000 times before. "I love you," she whispered against his mouth. "I love you too, my magnificent wife." And in that moment, Magnolia Thornhill Brennan, the girl who'd been called giant and freakish and broken, finally understood what it meant to be home. If this story touched your heart, subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss stories like this. Tell us in the comments what time it is and where you're watching from. We love hearing from you around the world.